first part we call the four pillars. And this is kind of the Portum Group's, I guess our theme or our vision is a way to put that. We see four pillars of organizational resilience, and they are data privacy, cybersecurity, compliance, and enterprise risk management. And so the first four chapters, the first part of our book, really does lay out in nice, clear, concise language those three areas. So that alone, I think, makes the book worthwhile, that we cover those areas in a concise but a fairly comprehensive way. So you get that right up front. And then what we do is we survey the legal landscape that our readers, our government employees, our government agencies swim in, if you will. I guess I mixed my metaphors here, that they run in, I don't know. But anyway, we've got a chapter on the major federal laws that involve cybersecurity and privacy, data privacy. Then we cover not every state. We don't try to cover 50 states, but we hit on the big ones, the ones that really are the big players, the leaders, the groundbreakers in data privacy and cyber. So obviously California, Colorado is one, Virginia is one, and with bio data, Illinois has kind of stepped in there with the Biometric Information Privacy Act. So we cover those, and I think we do a pretty nice job. So government employees can see, well, okay, what's going on out there that's kind of cutting edge? What are we looking for, maybe coming down our pathway as well? And then we even, in a chapter, pick out some municipal codes, some ordinances that deal with data privacy and cybersecurity. So out of New York, out of Los Angeles, and a few other selected cities, we cover that. That's part two. And then the third part, which I think is what makes it really ideal for government employees and their agencies, is we do what we call a toolkit for government agencies and employees. And the first part deals with collecting and storing data. The second part deals with using and disclosing data. So both ends of the data spectrum or the data pipeline we cover pretty well. And then we kind of bring that full circle and kind of apply that to all four pillars of organizational resilience. And some of the principles that we've teased out in those first two chapters, we kind of apply that more broadly. And so in the end, I think you've got pretty much in one book everything you need. You've got part one is kind of your theory part that's very clear, very concise, but nevertheless does cover the waterfront in the theoretical sense. Then part two, you've got the legal piece. And again, it's very palatable. You don't have to be a lawyer or love the law to be able to get a really good picture of what's going on now at the federal level and with the major players at the state and local levels. And then part three is that toolkit. It's that practical information that everybody working in government today can make good use of in dealing with their responsibilities. You may be with an agency that is concerned with actually data privacy or cybersecurity, or you may be with the multitude of other agencies that have to act like any other employer, have to act like any other organization in protecting data privacy and protecting their systems, their cybersecurity. And so I think for a book that only runs into a few hundred pages and that, the average person can read and appreciate and maybe even enjoy reading a little bit, I think we've really nailed it here. I think one that might surprise, and it's one of our first guidelines in that particular chapter, I believe that's chapter 8 or chapter 9, is that there should be no personal data systems that are maintained by a government agency that the very existence of the system is secret. And I think there was a time when there was kind of an assumption that, well, what we don't want to do is have personal data get out, that we have to protect personal data. But it's really nobody's business to what we as a government agency are collecting. on you, on me, on all of us. And I think that's really fallen into disrepute. I think it started with Snowden and his revelations about the NSA, but I think it's really spread through American government as kind of a principle now that it may, I don't know, it may, like I say, I think you're right. That there are, if there's anything that's surprising, it's going to be that some people out there, some of our readers are going to say, well, I haven't really, thought about that maybe I'm collecting some data that people have a right to know, that we should be more transparent about the data we collect. But I think that is extremely good advice. Not saying that the data itself is supposed to be available to anybody who wants to see it. Of course, obviously not. But government agencies really should let their constituency, whether it's local, municipal, or it's statewide, or it's at the federal level, your constituents should know that the collection system exists, that this collecting is ongoing. That I think is important, and I think it's probably a surprise to somebody to hear one of the authors say something like that. I think another thing that might surprise people about this book, and I take a lot of, I feel like this was I was, as the lead author, it was kind of one of my eureka or my aha moments, where I decided to put the entire Federal Internal Revenue Service privacy policy in as one of our appendices. And it's very, very long. And it got even longer because I spent a huge amount of my time as lead author annotating throughout that privacy policy. But I think what's going to surprise a lot of our readers when they go to that appendix, they'll see in some of the chapters, they'll see that I reference it, and I've even got a table relating to that appendix. But when you finally go back and say, okay, I'm going to go through this appendix and see where the authors, where Jim Castagnera, frankly, has done, what annotations have they done? The surprise is going to be how much there can be to a privacy and cybersecurity policy when you have an agency. Look, the IRS collects more data on more of us than anybody else in any other government agency in the whole country. I'm sure that's true. And they have an obligation to really protect that data, its privacy. I mean, just think about, I think that the Trump case, Trump's tax returns, I think that's been up to the Supreme Court 2 or 3 times. So you can see how important that privacy issue is, not just to Donald Trump, but I think to all of us, really. And so to see what an agency that has a particularly historic and powerful mandate to protect our private information, how they've done that, how they've handled it, I think it's going to be a real learning experience for our readers. And with my annotations, I like to believe I give myself a little, like I say, a little pat in the back and say, I think we did a nice job I did a good job of annotating it. I think you're going to be surprised at how much there is to go into, how much there is to think about when we talk about privacy. And, it's like when you talk about the Internet of Things. And I just saw a case recently where a company, I guess, got pretty heavily fined by a government agency, by Health and Human Services, in HIPAA violation. And guess how the HIPAA violation happened? They traded out some of their Xerox machines or their copy machines. Nobody thought to the possibility that the hard drives in these copy machines, these copiers, were preserving personal health information, PHI. But they did, and they traded out these machines, and all that information went right out the door. So the number of things that you need to think about in protecting private information and protecting your IT from incursion are just almost legion. And I feel like, when you get to that appendix number 3, I think that's going to be a big surprise for our readers. First of all, the states have lost patience with the federal government. And so more and more states are passing their own privacy law regimes. Utah, Connecticut, both got on board with that in 2022. And you're just going to see more and more state governments and even some municipalities, New York City is into it in a big way, getting involved in privacy legislation. Now, at the same time, at the federal level, I would bet, and I can't prove this, but I would bet you a couple of dollars that every member of Congress is in favor of a federal privacy law. The trouble is, it's like everything else in this country. It's like immigration, where you've got two sides to every issue. And so on the one hand, you've got Congress people who are in favor of something very stringent, like what California has passed in the data privacy area, where they've passed a couple of laws now. They're really into it in a big way. And a lot of legislators, and mostly I think liberals, are in favor of that kind of a regime at the federal level. And on the other hand, you've got pro-business Congress people in particular who are saying, well, we'd like to have, and our constituency and the lobbyists that we deal with, we would like to see a privacy regime that preempts the really harsh laws like California's and gives us a national policy on privacy that isn't quite that stringent, quite that onerous or that draconian. And so they never can seem to get together. Everybody wants a law, but nobody can quite decide what that law and agree on what that law ought to look like. So, the House of Representatives was controlled by Democrats for the second half of Trump's administration and for the first half of Biden's administration. And they passed a lot of different laws that just, the Senate was where those laws went to die. And one of the things that they passed last year is called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. And, that would be more along the lines of California law. It's unlikely that it's going to get through the Senate, although since the law is already passed by the House before the control of the House shifted to the GOP, and the Democrats do have a little bit more of a majority in the Senate than they had during Biden's first 2 years. I don't know, there may be a shot at a federal law this year along those lines. We'll just have to, see how that one plays out. Another area, and this really goes directly to our readers and their agencies, is protecting their own IT integrity and their own data privacy security. This all really kind of started like about 12, 13 years ago. I think many of us have heard of Stuxnet, Stuxnet. And the story about that, if you don't know anything about it, there's a great new documentary that just came out. I want to say maybe Netflix, although I'm not absolutely positive. It might be like Apple TV or something like that. But anyway, it's a 2-hour documentary about how back in 2010, the United States and Israel got together and they decided that they were going to infect the atomic bomb facilities that Iran had, these centrifuges that were making the bomb-grade uranium. They were going to infect them with a worm and destroy those centrifuges. And they were very, very successful in doing that. And the Iranians were firing their engineers because they thought it was their fault. They didn't even know they had a worm in there. But then the Israelis, according to this documentary, the Israelis got a little bit too aggressive, and they started doing things that finally the Iranians caught on. And the result was the Iranians created their own cyber army. And then a few years later, some of our federal government computers were infected with a worm, and we discovered, my gosh, it was our own Frankenstein monster in our machines. And starting there, really, I don't think there was really such a thing as cyber warfare before Stuxnet. But now, we need to, every government agency has to be vigilant. Doesn't matter whether, you may think, our mission is as far away from warfare as could possibly be. We're not involved with defense or any of that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean you're not going to be attacked by a foreign power in what is a very new kind of war that kind of, brings in all government agencies potentially as targets. And on top of that, of course, you've got the for-profit bad guys, the black hats out there, the pirates who are doing ransomware attacks, and on quite a few government agencies. I want to say the city of Atlanta, if my memory serves me, and a bunch of other cities have been subject to ransomware attacks where they've actually had to pay money to get their cyber unlocked. And that's not going to stop. These things are going to continue. And it's not a situation where, oh, this is for NSA or this is for CIA or this is for the Defense Department to worry about. Municipal government, state government, federal government, all of you folks need to be concerned about the possibility of ransomware attacks and cyber warfare coming from other unfriendly government agencies, such as from Iran, Russia, China, and maybe even other places, North Korea certainly, that we're not even thinking about. So some real challenges that they're going to be with us for the foreseeable future. There's meta platforms, which this is like, the artist formerly known as Prince. The meta platforms formerly known as Facebook, and I guess kind of still known as Facebook. But they've had a couple of interesting lawsuits where they've run targeted advertising. And then somebody has, in both cases, these are private plaintiffs who have brought class action suits in the past few months, where the targeted ad actually came to that individual, and it was clear that some medical information had been leaked to that advertiser about I think in the case of the woman, it was a heart condition, and in the man, I don't quite remember, but a couple of those cases. So again, in saying, that the government agencies have to be constantly vigilant, and especially like public hospitals would be an example, a very good example of a government agency that has to be ever so careful that somehow there are now people out there that are getting that information from places that they ought not to be poking around and using it to create targeted ads. And now Facebook has got caught up in that. So that's one real interesting area that just really came up toward the very end of last year and now into January. Another area, if you're using chatbots, so I think a number of government agencies do use chatbots already, where you go in and you get on the chat because you've got some questions. You go on the website, you start chatting, and you think you're chatting with a person, but you ain't chatting with a person. You're chatting with a chatbot, and all of this information is drawn out by the organization or the agency's computer and stored. You could very well be getting into some serious privacy violations, even as a governmental actor. And there are a couple of class action suits now out in California that are going after private organizations that have used these chatbots. And sometimes it's perfectly innocent. You've got this AI, this artificial intelligence, and you set it loose, and it's learning all the time. And it's having these conversations with people and gathering info, and you as a government agency or even a private corporation or a nonprofit, whoever you happen to be, whatever your organization, you're gathering information that you have no right to have. These individuals think that foolishly, often I think we as individuals get into that conversation. We think we're talking to a person. We think that all that just kind of goes off into the thin air when we log out, but it doesn't. That's not necessarily the case. So those are two areas of litigation that I see coming up that are brand new. Kind of there's always something new under the sun, no matter what that Greek philosopher said. And I think these are two areas we'll be watching too in the regulatory area. The FTC in the Biden administration has become extremely aggressive, and you're going to see a lot of activity. Non-competition agreements is their latest thing that they're attacking, but they are very interested, very active with regard to children's data, for instance, and data minimization, where, whether you're a government agency or you are private or you're nonprofit or for-profit, whatever you happen to be, if you are storing data which you don't need, you may find the FTC come knocking at your door and saying there's been a complaint that, why are you storing this data about American citizens, about individuals? And so that is an area where, I think we're going to see a lot of activity going forward. And then I was reading something as I was thinking about our interview today. I was reading something about additionally about AI, about artificial intelligence, and I saw one big law firm here in Philadelphia talked about AI as the holy grail of litigation, and I think that's probably right. And as far as government agencies are concerned, and especially I think maybe federal agencies, you have to be paying attention to what the National Institute of Standards and Technology is doing. The NIST, N-I-S-T, the NIST standards. I bet many of you, and of course we cover that in a couple of our chapters. One of our authors, Jim Gopal in particular, is very, very knowledgeable on NIST, and he's going to be updating those chapters for the 2023 edition of the book that we're working on right now, because they just brought out brand new risk management framework for AI. So Jim is just beginning to really digest that himself, and he'll be covering that in his chapters of the book on cybersecurity and enterprise risk management. And so that the holy grail, I don't know if that's kind of tongue in cheek. It's maybe the holy grail of litigators, but that's another area where we're going to have to be. We're going to have to make sure our book is up to date, and all of our readers are going to have to make sure that they are on top of that. And then there is a new law that was enacted. It's funny because we always think, I was talking about a couple minutes ago how, well, it seems like there's always two sides to everything in Congress now, and they're kind of banging heads. But actually, a lot of a lot of legislation did get passed in the past couple of years, and Biden really is kind of the deal maker he claims to be, I would argue. But there was a law that came out last March, so less than a year ago, called the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. It's kind of a mouthful. It's CIRCIA if you want an acronym. And that's going to require various kinds of reporting that you folks out in various government agencies at all levels have to pay attention to that law. So those are the trends I'm seeing as we are just in the first month, coming at the end of January here in our interview, coming toward the end of the first month of the year. A lot going on out there. This is going to be a big year. I'd almost go so far as to say, this is going to be the year of data privacy. You just watch and see if I'm not right.